Well, in 1958, Charlotte was at its heyday. Every storefront was filled, every storefront was desirable as a place to have a business. The center of commerce was definitely right there at the center of Trade and Tryon. And there could be 10 or 15 door fronts for stores on a single block. It's hard to imagine that they were that close together. I believe people had to park on the streets and in the parking decks and in flat lots. And yes, people would come uptown in Charlotte to shop, to be seen, to have lunch, to go to the movie, to shop for virtually any product that a consumer would be seeking. South Park, Eastland, and the covered malls had not come to Charlotte in 1958. A mall, in some ways, was built to imitate the old style of towns or cities. To have lots of shops right next to each other. The main innovation that the mall offered was that the doors could be wide open every day of the year because the weather was controlled and nobody got wet under the roof. Charlotte was a big enough city that it actually had an African-American commercial center, and it was in the neighborhood that is commonly known as Brooklyn, but that New York reference name refers to Second Ward in Charlotte. And the main street of Second Ward, by coincidence, is what was then Second Street. And so it's been appropriately picked as the street to be named Martin Luther King Boulevard here in Charlotte, because it was the business street of the African American community. It was also known as Blue Heaven. They say because it had a blue haze over it many times in the winter because of the coal-fired homes that were there, and the coal smoke would center over this part of town, something like the smog you'd see in LA. We had one challenge in uptown Charlotte. The bus lines ran directly through Trade and Tryon in both directions, which meant that there would be buses in the 1970s lined up the way you sometimes see them in front of a school, in maybe both directions, and people getting on. And that mob scene downtown, both traffic-wise with the buses and people-wise, kind of crowded the sidewalks. And so some people didn't feel comfortable going down there and just shopping. Plus, the price of real estate was skyrocketing because you were then competing with, after 1978, interstate banks. And so at the same time, the glitz and glamour of Eastland Mall and South Park Mall obviously would attract people who, number one, lived nearer they, and number two, it was more appealing to the people who owned the stores. The rent might be high, but probably not as high as operating at the corner of Trade and Tryon when you're competing with big tenants and major buildings. You know, Mayor Harvey Gantt made an observation 20 or so years ago. He said that Charlotte has growing pains. And he said we should be thankful that we don't have dying pains, which are experienced in many cities. But in those growing pains, we've been so successful that the value of the land skyrocketed. It's hard to tell even a good citizen not to accept that $1 million. We were a victim of our success. If we had every single building that existed 110 years ago, we'd only have the buildings of a 20,000 person town, you see. The great historical preservation sections of cities in America that I have found almost invariably exist because of the bad economy that was there for years and years and years. But that failure of the bulldozer of progress to come through ends up being the great win for saving history.